Nobody expected Frederick Taylor to still be breathing after the first 12 hours. When the radio crackled its final message at 0347 hours that October morning in 1943, Corporal Frederick Taylor pressed his face against the cold sand of the Tunisian desert and listened to his entire unit being torn apart 3 miles behind him. The sound of German artillery wasn't the terrifying part, it was the silence that followed. That's when he knew he was completely, utterly alone. What happened next would either kill him or turn him into something he never wanted to become. Frederick had volunteered for this reconnaissance mission because someone had to, and because the alternative was watching more good men die for bad intelligence. The 8th Army needed to know what the Germans were planning in the Kasserine Pass, and aerial reconnaissance wasn't cutting it. Someone had to get close. Someone had to see with their own eyes. Someone dispensable. 72 hours, Taylor, Lieutenant Morrison had said, not looking him in the eye. In and out. Radio check every 12 hours. Missed 2 calls, and we assume you're compromised. Frederick had nodded, checking his gear one final time. Water for 4 days, if he was careful. Ammunition for maybe one firefight, if he was lucky. A compass that had been rattling since Cairo, and a photograph of his sister Margaret that he kept in his breast pocket, right over his heart. Not for luck, he told himself. For remembering why you're here. But now, pressed flat against a ridge overlooking enemy positions with German voices drifting up from the valley below, Frederick realized that everything they'd planned for was wrong. The intelligence was worse than bad, it was catastrophically, dangerously wrong. There weren't supposed to be this many Germans here, there wasn't supposed to be armor, and there definitely wasn't supposed to be what looked like preparations for a major offensive that would cut the 8th Army to pieces if someone didn't warn them. Frederick pulled out his field glasses with trembling hands, not from fear, but from exhaustion and dehydration. He'd been crawling for 16 hours straight, moving only when the wind covered his sounds, freezing whenever a German patrol passed within 50 yards of his position. Through the lenses, he counted. Tanks, artillery pieces, supply trucks, communication equipment. Numbers that made his stomach clench with dread. This isn't a defensive position, he realized. This is a staging area. But the worst part wasn't what he could see, it was what he couldn't hear. His radio had been silent for 18 hours. No response to his calls. No acknowledgement of his position updates. Either his unit was gone, or his radio was dead, or both. Either way, Frederick Taylor was sitting on intelligence that could save thousands of British lives, and he had no way to communicate it. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of orange and red that reminded him uncomfortably of fire. Soon it would be dark, and the temperature would drop 40 degrees. Soon the Germans would settle in for the night, and he'd have his first real opportunity to move closer. Or to run. The thought hit him like a physical blow. He could retreat. Navigate by the stars back toward British lines. Report what he'd seen to whoever was left. Let someone else figure out how to stop what was coming. But looking down at the German preparations, Frederick knew that by the time he made it back, if he made it back, it would be too late. The offensive would be underway. Good men would be dying because he chose safety over duty. Margaret wouldn't run, he thought, touching the photograph through his shirt. She'd find a way. As if summoned by his thoughts, a German patrol began climbing the ridge toward his position. Frederick had 30 seconds to make a decision that would define the next 71 hours and 53 minutes of his life. Hide and hope they passed by. Fight and certainly die. Or there was a third option. One that made his blood run cold just thinking about it. He could go down there, into the German camp. In the dark, alone. The patrol was getting closer. 20 seconds now. Frederick closed his eyes, said a prayer to a God he wasn't sure was listening anymore, and made a choice that surprised even him. But what happened when he opened his eyes again would haunt him for the rest of his life, however long that turned out to be. The first 12 hours were just the beginning. Frederick Taylor's real test was about to start, and nobody, not the Germans, not the British, not even Frederick himself, was prepared for what came next. Hour 19, Into the Wolf's den. Frederick rolled left just as the German boot stepped where his head had been 3 seconds earlier. The patrol passed within arm's reach, so close he could smell their cigarettes, hear one of them complaining about the cold in broken Arabic to a local guide. Frederick pressed his face into the sand and held his breath until his lungs screamed for air. When their voices faded into the distance, he knew there was no going back. The German camp spread out below him like a miniature city. Cooking fires dotted the valley floor, and the sound of men settling in for the night drifted up on the desert wind. Frederick counted at least 300 soldiers, maybe more. Artillery positions marked by the distinctive silhouettes of 88mm guns. And everywhere, the purposeful movement of an army preparing for war. But it was the communications tent that caught his attention, a large canvas structure with radio antennas sprouting from its roof like metal flowers. If he could get close enough to that tent, he might be able to intercept their communications. Learn timing, objectives, target coordinates. Or get shot trying. Frederick began his descent as soon as full darkness fell. Every step was calculated, every movement planned 3 steps ahead. The loose shale would give him away if he moved too fast, but German sentries would spot him if he stayed exposed too long. 20 minutes into the climb down, he heard voices again, closer this time. Hans, did you check the perimeter on the east ridge? Ja, nothing but rocks and sand. This whole country is cursed. Frederick froze, pressed against a boulder the size of a small car. The Germans were setting up a guard post less than 50 meters from his position. He could see the glow of their cigarettes in the darkness, hear the metallic click of weapons being checked and rechecked. This wasn't part of the plan. There wasn't supposed to be a guard post here. But then again, nothing had gone according to plan for the last 20 hours. As the guards settled into their position, Frederick realized he had 2 choices: wait until dawn and risk being spotted in daylight, or find another way down. Through the minefield he could now see stretching across the valley floor. The Germans had marked their own mines with small white stones arranged in patterns only they would recognize. But in the darkness, those patterns looked like random arrangements of rock that could mean anything or nothing. Frederick studied the field for 10 minutes, trying to identify safe paths. There, a zigzag pattern that might indicate a safe corridor. Or it might be misdirection designed to channel attackers into a kill zone. Only one way to find out. His first step into the minefield felt like stepping off a cliff. The sand beneath his feet felt different here, looser, more recently disturbed. Frederick moved like he was walking on eggshells, testing each footstep before committing his full weight. 10 steps. 20. 50. Halfway across the field, he heard it, the distinctive whine of incoming artillery from a different direction entirely. Not German shells. British. No, he thought. Not now. Not when I'm in the middle of a bloody minefield. The first shell hit the eastern edge of the camp, lighting up the night like a camera flash. Suddenly the entire German position erupted into chaos. Men shouting orders, vehicles starting, weapons being moved to defensive positions, and Frederick Taylor, caught in the middle of a minefield during an artillery barrage, realized that his 72 hours alone had just become infinitely more complicated. But what he discovered in the communications tent 20 minutes later would change everything. The British weren't just attacking randomly, they were walking into a trap. The German positions Frederick had been reconnoitering weren't defensive at all. They were bait. The real German force was hidden in the hills beyond, waiting for the British to commit to an attack on empty positions. Frederick had stumbled onto something much bigger than a reconnaissance mission. He'd found the trap that was about to swallow the entire 8th Army. And he was the only person who knew about it. But knowing about it and surviving long enough to do something about it were very different problems. The communications tent was chaos when Frederick finally reached it. Radio operators shouting coordinates in rapid German, officers bent over maps under the glow of kerosene lanterns, runners coming and going with messages, and there, spread across the central table, was a map that made Frederick's blood turn to ice. British unit positions marked in red. German positions marked in blue. And a series of arrows showing exactly how the Germans planned to surround and destroy every British unit in the sector, including Frederick's own regiment. If this map was accurate, the attack beginning right now would be the last thing most of his friends ever saw. Frederick reached for his camera, a small German model he'd liberated from a dead Afrika Korps officer months earlier. If he could photograph this map, get the intelligence back to British lines, that's when the tent flap opened and a German officer stepped inside. Frederick had perhaps 2 seconds before the officer noticed an unauthorized person crouched next to their most sensitive intelligence. What happened next would determine not just Frederick's fate, but the fate of thousands of British soldiers who had no idea they were walking into annihilation. The officer was young, maybe 25, with the kind of precise bearing that suggested Prussian military academy training. His hand was already moving toward his sidearm when his eyes met Frederick's across the tent. For a moment that lasted forever, neither man moved. Then Frederick smiled and said, in his best German accent, "Hauptmann Weber asked me to verify these coordinates." It was complete improvisation, and it was about to either save his life or end it. Hour 21, the bluff. The German officer's hand froze halfway to his weapon. "Weber," he repeated, squinting at Frederick in the dim light. "Hans Weber from the 15th Panzer Reconnaissance." Frederick's mind raced. Wrong answer here meant death. Right answer might buy him 30 seconds. "Ja," he replied, keeping his voice steady. He wanted verification on the artillery coordinates before the morning advance. The officer relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained suspicious. "You're not from our communications unit." "I know all of Weber's men." This was it. Frederick had seconds before the bluff collapsed entirely. "Transfer came through yesterday," Frederick said, moving slightly closer to the map table. "From the 21st Panzer Division." You know how Weber is about his intelligence. The mention of Weber's supposed perfectionism seemed to strike a chord. The officer nodded knowingly and stepped toward the map. Yes, Weber always was thorough. What specifically does he need verified? Frederick leaned over the map, his heart hammering so hard he was sure the German could hear it. But instead of answering, he did something that surprised even himself. He started taking notes, real notes. In German. About actual coordinates that would help the German attack succeed, because in that moment, Frederick Taylor realized something that changed everything. The only way to survive the next few minutes was to become exactly what he appeared to be, a German soldier doing his job. "These positions here," he said, pointing to British defensive coordinates. "Weber wants to confirm the timing of the preliminary bombardment." "Ah yes, 0430 hours. Tell Weber the Stukas will have completed their runs by 0445, and the artillery will shift to support positions by 0500. Frederick wrote it down, even as his stomach churned with the knowledge that he was documenting the destruction of British positions. Including positions where his friends might be sleeping right now. "And the secondary advance?" Frederick asked, studying the arrows on the map. 0530 through the WWII system. The Tommies never expect armor to come through rough terrain. By 0600, we'll have them surrounded. Every word was intelligence that could save British lives, if Frederick could survive long enough to deliver it. The officer was warming to his subject now, clearly proud of the tactical planning. "It's brilliant, really. The Tommies think they're attacking our main positions, but those are just fixed defensive points with skeleton crews. Our real strength is here." He pointed to positions in the hills that didn't appear on any British intelligence maps. "Waiting to close the trap." Frederick nodded and continued writing, but his mind was calculating distances and timing. Even if he left right now, it would take him at least 6 hours to reach British lines. The attack would begin in 7 hours. It would be close. Impossibly close. "One more thing," the officer said, and Frederick's blood turned cold. "Weber should know that we've had radio intercepts suggesting British reconnaissance in the area. Extra patrols have been ordered." Frederick looked up from his notes. "Reconnaissance?" "Yes. Someone's been transmitting from the eastern ridge for the past 18 hours. We haven't been able to triangulate exactly, but when the sun comes up, we'll find them." Frederick realized with growing horror that they were talking about him. His abandoned radio position. The location where he tried to call in his initial reports before going dark. They'd been tracking him all along. Any idea who it might be? Frederick asked, keeping his voice casual. British forward observer, most likely. Probably dead by now. We sent a full platoon to sweep the area 2 hours ago. Frederick's hand tightened on his pencil. If they'd found his original position, they'd find his equipment. His identification. Maybe even evidence of his planned infiltration route, which meant they might already know exactly who he was and what he was doing here. The tent flap opened again, and this time it wasn't a single officer. 3 German soldiers entered, led by a sergeant whose eyes swept the tent with the practiced wariness of someone expecting trouble. Hauptmann, the sergeant said to the officer, we found something at the observation post. He held up a British field radio. Its antenna snapped but its identification markings clearly visible. Frederick's radio. And this, the sergeant continued, producing a water bottle with British Army markings. Frederick's water bottle. The officer's expression changed instantly. His hand moved to his sidearm with deadly precision. It seems, he said quietly, that our British reconnaissance friend might be closer than we thought. Frederick felt the weight of every German eye in the tent focusing on him. His cover story, Weber, transfer orders, routine verification, suddenly seemed as transparent as tissue paper. He had perhaps 3 seconds before someone asked to see his identification papers. Papers he didn't have. In German uniform he'd never been issued, claiming authority from an officer who might not even exist. But Frederick Taylor had survived 21 hours behind enemy lines not by following plans, but by adapting when plans went to hell. And right now, he was about to do something so audacious, so completely insane, that it might actually work. Or get him shot where he stood. Sergeant, Frederick said, straightening to his full height and adopting the crisp tone of Prussian authority, I need you to gather every available man for an immediate sweep of the eastern perimeter. The sergeant blinked, clearly confused by this unexpected command from someone he didn't recognize. Sir. The British operative is still out there, Frederick continued, his voice growing more authoritative with each word. And if he's as good as his equipment suggests, he's already seen our preparations for tomorrow's advance. What Frederick did next would either establish his authority in the German camp, or expose him as the enemy agent they were hunting. The tent fell silent except for the distant sound of British artillery still falling on the decoy positions, and in that silence, Frederick Taylor made a decision that would define the remaining 50 hours of his mission. I know exactly where he is, Frederick said quietly. And I know exactly how to catch him. Frederick is now directing the hunt for himself while standing in the middle of German headquarters. The next phase will test every limit of his deception, and his survival instincts. Hour 22, hunting the hunter. You know where the British agent is? The officer asked, his hand still hovering near his weapon. Frederick nodded grimly, pointing to the map. Based on the radio intercepts and the equipment location, he's following a classic reconnaissance pattern. British forward observers are trained to establish multiple observation posts, never staying in one location more than 6 hours. It was complete fabrication, but it was fabrication based on real British tactics that Frederick knew intimately, because he'd been trained in them. So where is he now? The sergeant demanded. Frederick studied the map, letting tension build while he calculated his next move. Every second he delayed was another second closer to the British attack, and another second deeper into enemy territory. Here, he said finally, pointing to a ridge system 2 kilometers south of the camp. If he's following doctrine, he'll have moved to high ground with clear sight lines to observe our defensive preparations. The officer leaned forward, studying Frederick's indicated position. That's a good position for observation. But it's also heavily exposed. Why would he risk it? Frederick realized this was the moment that would make or break his deception. Because he's not just observing, Frederick said, his voice dropping to a whisper that forced everyone to lean closer. He's already photographed our positions. Now he needs to find a way back to British lines with the intelligence. And there's only one route back that avoids our patrol patterns, through the Wadi al-Kabir, but only during the 2 hours before dawn when visibility is minimal but movement is still possible. Frederick was gambling everything on German unfamiliarity with local terrain. The Wadi al-Kabir was real, a dried riverbed that did provide concealed movement toward British positions. But it was also exactly where Frederick needed to go. So we set up an ambush in the wadi, the sergeant said, nodding approvingly. No, Frederick replied sharply. That's what he expects. British training emphasizes anticipating obvious ambush points. The officer's eyes narrowed. Then what do you suggest? Frederick moved closer to the map, projecting confidence he absolutely didn't feel. We let him think he succeeded. Explain. We withdraw patrols from the wadi. Create the appearance of a gap in our security. When he moves through the corridor we've deliberately opened, we close it behind him, but not to capture him. The tent was dead silent now. Frederick could feel every German in the room hanging on his next words. We follow him back to British lines. Let him lead us directly to their forward command positions. The suggestion was so audacious, so tactically risky, that it actually sounded like German operational thinking. The Afrika Korps had built their reputation on exactly this kind of aggressive, unconventional approach. That's actually brilliant, the officer said slowly. Use their own agent to reveal their positions. But it requires perfect timing, Frederick continued. And it requires someone who understands British reconnaissance methods to lead the pursuit team. He let the implication hang in the air. You're volunteering? The sergeant asked. I've studied British methods extensively, Frederick replied, which was true enough. And I know how they think when they're trying to escape and evade. The officer nodded slowly. Very well. Take a squad, no, take 2 squads. But I want radio contact every 30 minutes. Frederick's heart nearly stopped. Radio contact meant German military frequencies. Call signs he didn't know. Protocols he couldn't possibly follow. His deception would collapse within hours. Actually, he said carefully, radio silence would be better. British monitoring capabilities are extensive. If they detect our communications, they'll know their agent has been compromised and abort whatever operation he's supporting. Then how do we coordinate? Frederick pulled out his watch, a German timepiece he'd taken from the same dead officer who'd provided his camera. Simple timing. I establish the pursuit track, follow at maximum distance to avoid detection. At 0200 hours, I signal with red flare if the target is moving toward British lines. Green flare if he changes direction. No flare means abort and return to base. It was a plan that gave Frederick nearly 4 hours of operational freedom while making the Germans think they were conducting their own operation. And if something goes wrong? The sergeant asked. Frederick met his eyes steadily. Then you proceed with tomorrow's attack knowing that at least you eliminated their forward observer. The officer nodded approvingly. Excellent. Take squads 7 and 12. Move out in 20 minutes. As the Germans began organizing the pursuit operation, Frederick stepped outside into the desert night and allowed himself exactly 5 seconds to process what he'd just accomplished. He'd convinced the enemy to provide him with an escort back toward friendly lines. He'd neutralized the search for himself by redirecting it to the wrong area. He'd bought himself 4 hours of operational freedom. And he'd done it all while standing in the middle of German headquarters. But now came the hard part. He had to actually make it work. Ready, sir? Sergeant Klaus asked, approaching with 18 heavily armed German soldiers. Frederick looked at the men who were about to unknowingly help him complete his mission, or kill him trying. Ready, he said. And as they moved out into the darkness, Frederick Taylor realized that the most dangerous phase of his 72 hours was just beginning. Because now he wasn't just evading the enemy. He was leading them. But what none of them knew, not Frederick, not the Germans, not the British forces preparing for dawn, was that someone else was hunting in the darkness tonight. Someone who had been tracking Frederick's movements for the past 6 hours. Someone who knew exactly who he was. And someone who had very different plans for how this night would end. The first sign that something was wrong came 20 minutes into the march, when the point man's whispered report crackled through the darkness. Movement ahead. Single figure. Approximately 800 meters. Frederick raised his field glasses and felt his blood turn to ice. There, silhouetted against the starlit horizon, was a lone figure moving with the practiced stealth of a professional soldier. A figure wearing British uniform. A figure who was definitely not Frederick Taylor. Which meant there really was another British agent operating behind German lines. And Frederick had just led 19 German soldiers directly to him. The hunt has become infinitely more complicated. Frederick now faces a moral crisis that could destroy everything he's worked for, save a fellow British soldier, or maintain his cover to complete the mission. Hour 23, the impossible choice. Orders, sir. Sergeant Klaus whispered, his rifle already trained on the distant figure. Frederick's mind raced through calculations that had no good answers. If he ordered the attack, a British soldier would die, potentially someone from his own regiment, someone who might have vital intelligence about German operations. If he warned the target, 19 German soldiers would know he was a British agent, and he'd be dead within seconds. If he did nothing, the Germans would act on their own initiative anyway. Hold position, Frederick whispered back. Let me observe his movement pattern first. Through his field glasses, Frederick studied the lone figure. The man was good, very good. His movement was textbook British reconnaissance, short rushes between cover, frequent stops to observe, never silhouetting himself against the horizon for more than a few seconds. But he was also making a fundamental mistake. He was moving directly toward the German patrol. Either he doesn't know we're here, Frederick thought, or he's deliberately approaching us. Sir, Klaus whispered urgently, he's getting closer. We need to. The British agent suddenly dropped prone, disappearing behind a low ridge. Frederick held his breath. Had the men spotted them? Was he flanking? Retreating? Then he heard it, the distinctive whistle of an incoming mortar round. Incoming! Frederick shouted, throwing himself flat. The mortar shell exploded 30 meters to their left, showering the patrol with sand and shrapnel. Before the echo faded, 2 more rounds hit in rapid succession, bracketing their position with deadly precision. He's calling in artillery support. Klaus shouted over the explosions, but Frederick was already moving, his mind processing tactical realities with crystal clarity. No, he called back. This is indirect fire from a single tube. He's not calling anything in, he's operating alone. Which meant the British agent wasn't just reconnaissance. He was sabotage. Split into 2 groups. Frederick commanded. Klaus, take half the men left. I'll take the rest right. We envelope him from both sides. What about you, sir? I'm going straight at him. It was tactically sound, but it was also something else. It was exactly what Frederick needed to do to get close enough to the British agent to warn him without the Germans hearing. As the patrol split up, Frederick led his 9-man team in a direct assault toward the British position. It was dangerous, exposed, and completely insane. It was also the only way to reach the other agent before Klaus's flanking force did. Another mortar round exploded directly in their path. He's got our range. One of the Germans shouted. Frederick dove into a shallow wadi, his team scattered behind whatever cover they could find. The British agent was firing with the kind of precision that suggested he knew exactly where they were and exactly what he was doing. Professional soldier, Frederick realized. Special operations, most likely. Which meant he was probably carrying intelligence even more valuable than Frederick's own. Sir. One of the Germans called out. I can see his muzzle flash. Permission to engage. Frederick raised his rifle, sighting on the position where the mortar fire was originating. Through his scope, he could see movement, a figure repositioning between shots with fluid, practiced efficiency, and then, for just a moment, the figure turned toward Frederick's position. Frederick's blood turned to ice. Even at 200 meters, even in starlight, he recognized the face in his rifle scope, Lieutenant James Morrison, his commanding officer, the man who had sent him on this mission 72 hours ago, the man who was supposed to be back at British headquarters, planning operations based on Frederick's intelligence reports. What the hell was Morrison doing behind German lines? "Sir, do we engage?" Klaus's voice crackled across the tactical frequency. Frederick's finger tightened on the trigger. One shot would solve multiple problems. It would maintain his cover with the Germans. It would eliminate questions about why Morrison was here. It would let Frederick complete his mission without complications, but it would also mean killing his commanding officer. A man who might be on a mission even more important than Frederick's own. "Sir." Klaus pressed. Frederick made a decision that surprised even him. "Negative. I want him alive for interrogation." "Alive?" "Sir, that's extremely risky. Those are my orders, Sergeant." But even as Frederick gave the command, he was calculating angles and distances. Morrison's position was strong defensively, but it was also a trap. The lieutenant was dug in with good fields of fire, but no escape route, unless someone created one. Frederick was about to do something that would either save Morrison's life or get them both killed. "Klaus, cease fire and hold position," Frederick commanded. "I'm going to talk to him." "Talk to him?" "Sir, he's been trying to kill us for the past 10 minutes. "That's an order, Sergeant." Frederick began moving forward, leaving his rifle behind and raising his hands in a gesture that could be surrender, negotiation, or elaborate suicide. "British soldier." He called out in English, loudly enough for Morrison to hear but quietly enough that the Germans might not recognize the language. "I want to talk." The mortar fire stopped. Frederick continued advancing, acutely aware that he was now completely exposed to fire from both sides. Morrison could shoot him for being with the Germans, or the Germans could shoot him for communicating with the enemy. "That's close enough." Morrison's voice carried across the desert. Frederick could hear the strain in it, the exhaustion of a man who'd been operating alone under extreme stress. "James," Frederick called softly, using Morrison's first name. "It's Frederick Taylor." The silence that followed lasted forever. "Frederick." Morrison's voice was barely audible. "What the bloody hell are you doing with German troops?" "Long story." "What are you doing here?" "Following you." The words hit Frederick like a physical blow. "Following me?" "Your last radio transmission was intercepted. Not just by us, by German intelligence. They've been tracking you for 18 hours. Frederick felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew about his situation was wrong. "James, you need to get out of here. Now." "Can't do that, Frederick. I'm here to extract you." "Extract me?" "I'm in the middle of the most important intelligence gathering of the war." "The intelligence you're gathering doesn't matter anymore." Morrison's next words changed everything. "The German offensive you've been tracking. It's a diversion. The real attack is happening tomorrow morning. 15 miles south of here. And you're the only person who can stop it." Frederick stared across the desert at his commanding officer, processing implications that made his 72-hour mission suddenly seem like a small piece of a much larger, much more dangerous puzzle. "How do I stop it?" "By doing something that will probably get us both killed." But before Morrison could explain, Klaus's voice crackled across the German radio frequency. "Sir, we have movement on the perimeter. Multiple contacts approaching from the east." Frederick spun around, raising his field glasses toward the indicated direction. What he saw made his heart stop. British armored vehicles. At least a full company, moving fast and straight toward their position. The extraction Morrison had mentioned wasn't just Morrison. It was a full-scale British assault. And Frederick was standing between two armies that were about to collide. with 18 German soldiers who still thought he was on their side, and a commanding officer who apparently had orders that Frederick didn't understand, and intelligence about a German offensive that might or might not be real. All with less than 48 hours remaining on his original 72-hour mission. What happened next would determine not just Frederick's survival, but the fate of thousands of soldiers on both sides. "Klaus!" Frederick shouted. "Form defensive positions. British armor approaching from the east." "Sir, what about the prisoner?" Frederick looked across the desert at Morrison, who was already packing his mortar tube with the efficient speed of a man who'd done this 100 times before. "Leave him," Frederick said. "We have bigger problems now." But as the German soldiers scrambled to establish defensive positions against the approaching British assault, Frederick realized that the biggest problem wasn't the tactical situation. The biggest problem was that he still had no idea whose side he was really on. Frederick is now caught between converging British and German forces, with a commanding officer whose orders he doesn't understand, and intelligence that may be completely wrong. The next phase will test everything he's learned in 48 hours behind enemy lines. Hour 24. Between the hammer and the anvil, the first British shell hit the German position exactly where Frederick had been standing 30 seconds earlier. "Take cover!" Klaus screamed, diving behind a shattered boulder as shrapnel whined overhead. Frederick rolled into a depression in the sand, his mind racing through tactical calculations that all led to the same conclusion. They were completely screwed. The approaching British armor had superior firepower, superior numbers, and superior position. The German patrol had experience, desperation, and exactly 17 minutes of ammunition if they were lucky. "Sir!" Klaus crawled over to Frederick's position as another shell exploded nearby. "Orders." Frederick looked at the sergeant's face, young, frightened, but still trusting his authority. Still believing Frederick was a German officer who would get them out of this alive. The weight of that trust felt heavier than the incoming artillery. "Can you reach regimental command on radio?" Frederick asked. "Negative. Too much interference from the British jamming." Which meant no reinforcements. No support. No extraction. Just 19 men against a British armored company. Unless... Frederick raised his head just enough to scan the battlefield. Morrison's position was 200 meters north, close enough to reach under covering fire, but far enough that he'd be exposed for at least 30 seconds of sprinting. The British armor was advancing from the east in classic formation, tanks in front, infantry following, artillery support coordinating from the rear, and there, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, was something that made Frederick's blood run cold. German armor moving fast from the west. The German patrol wasn't the only unit caught in the middle of this engagement. "Klaus," Frederick said urgently, "look west. Tell me what you see." The sergeant raised his field glasses, then went rigid. "Panzer IVs. At least a full squadron." "Ours." "Has to be. But why aren't they on the radio frequency?" Frederick knew why. Because the German armor wasn't coming to rescue Klaus's patrol, they were coming to complete whatever Operation Morrison was trying to stop. The battle that was about to unfold wasn't random. It was planned. And Frederick was the only person on the battlefield who understood what was really happening. "Sir!" One of the German soldiers called out. "British infantry dismounting. Range 400 meters. Frederick could see them now, 24 British soldiers advancing with the methodical precision of experienced troops. They were taking their time, letting their armor soften the German position before closing for the kill. Standard tactics. Effective tactics. But tactics based on the assumption that they were fighting Germans. What would happen when they realized one of the Germans was actually Corporal Frederick Taylor? "Klaus, I need to reach that British prisoner we were tracking." "Sir?" "Now. He has information about British tactical plans. If I can interrogate him." Another shell exploded, closer this time. Frederick felt the concussion in his chest. "Sir, that's suicide." The British will cut you down before you're halfway there. Not if you provide covering fire. Frederick was already moving, crawling out of the depression toward Morrison's position. Behind him, Klaus began coordinating suppressing fire from the patrol, not enough to stop the British advance, but enough to keep their heads down for a few crucial seconds. Frederick sprinted across open ground under fire from both sides. British bullets whined overhead. German muzzle flashes lit up the darkness behind him. Artillery shells bracketed his path with deadly precision, and through it all, one thought dominated his mind: Morrison has answers I need. He dove into Morrison's fighting position just as a machine gun burst tore up the sand where he'd been running. Frederick. Morrison grabbed his arm. What the hell are you doing? Getting answers. James, what's the real mission? Morrison looked at him with eyes that held too much knowledge and not enough time. The German offensive you've been tracking, it's real, but it's not the main event. Then what is? Chemical weapons. Frederick felt the world tilt. What? The Germans have been developing a new type of gas. Something that makes mustard gas look like perfume. They're planning to deploy it tomorrow morning against the 8th Army's main positions. Frederick's mind reeled. Chemical weapons had been banned after the Great War, but desperate armies did desperate things. How do you know this? Because we captured one of their chemical weapons specialists 3 days ago. Before he died, he told us everything. And you sent me on a reconnaissance mission instead of warning headquarters. Morrison's expression darkened. Because headquarters doesn't believe it. They think it's German disinformation designed to make us overreact. Another shell exploded nearby, showering them with debris. So what's the plan? Frederick shouted over the noise. You're going to infiltrate the chemical weapons depot and destroy it. I'm going to what? It's 15 miles south of here. Underground facility, minimal security. Get in, plant charges, get out. Frederick stared at his commanding officer. James, that's a suicide mission. No, Morrison replied grimly. It's a necessary mission. And if I refuse? Morrison pulled out a sealed envelope. Then you read these orders and follow them to the letter. Frederick opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The orders were brief, direct, and signed by General Montgomery himself. Corporal Taylor is authorized to take any action necessary to prevent German chemical weapons deployment. Mission priority, ultimate. Survival probability, minimal. Expected outcome, strategic success at tactical cost. Frederick looked up at Morrison. Tactical cost. You're not expected to survive, Frederick. None of us are. The words hit like a physical blow. You're telling me this entire mission was designed to be one way. I'm telling you that sometimes good men have to die to save better ones. Frederick felt anger rising in his chest, clean, pure rage that cut through confusion and fear like a knife. And you waited until now to tell me. Because if you'd known from the beginning, you might not have gotten this far. Another explosion, closer than before. Frederick could hear Klaus's voice shouting commands to the German patrol, men who were fighting and dying while believing Frederick was their officer. Men who trusted him. James, there's something you don't know. What? Those Germans over there. They think I'm one of them. Morrison looked up with the defiant expression of a captured officer who wasn't going to cooperate. Lieutenant, I asked you a question. Name, rank, and serial number. That's all you're getting from me. Richter smiled coldly. We'll see about that. Weber, these prisoners need immediate processing at the secure facility before transport to division headquarters. Sir, which facility? The research station, 15 kilometers south. Dr. Mueller will want to question them about British countermeasures before the deployment. Frederick felt a surge of satisfaction. Richter was personally ordering them transported to exactly where they needed to go. Understood, sir. Timeline for processing. Immediate. Chemical deployment begins in. Richter checked his watch. 14 minutes. I want these prisoners secured and initial interrogation completed before the bombardment. Perfect. Except for one small problem. Sir, one of Richter's aides called out, incoming radio message from Division Command. Richter walked over to the radio operator, listened to a brief, crackling transmission, then returned with an expression that made Frederick's blood run cold. Change of plans, Weber. Division reports that Hauptmann Weber was killed in action 18 hours ago near El Alamein. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Which means, Richter continued, his hand moving to his sidearm, you're either an imposter, a deserter, or a British agent. Frederick felt 19 German rifles swinging toward him. Now, Richter said quietly, who exactly are you? Frederick Taylor had survived 25 hours behind enemy lines through improvisation, deception, and sheer audacity. But this time, there was nowhere to run, no story that would work, and no clever plan that could save him. There was only the truth. And 13 minutes until chemical weapons deployment. Oberst Richter, Frederick said, removing his German field cap and meeting the colonel's eyes steadily, my name is Corporal Frederick Taylor, British Army. And I'm here to save your life. The words hung in the desert air like a challenge. Richter's eyes widened slightly. Save my life. The chemical deployment you've authorized. It's not targeting British positions. It's targeting this entire area, including your convoy, your men, and the research facility you're sending us to. That's impossible. Frederick gestured toward Klaus. Ask your sergeant. He heard the radio transmission expanding the target zone. Ask your radio operator about the updated timeline moving deployment to 0530 hours. Richter's expression shifted from suspicion to growing alarm. Klaus. The German sergeant stepped forward reluctantly. Sir, we did receive updated targeting information. Expanded zone, accelerated timeline. And you didn't think to report this? Sir, we were engaged with British forces and, Richter waved him silent, then turned back to Frederick. You're telling me that German High Command has authorized chemical deployment against our own positions. I'm telling you that someone has authorized chemical deployment against positions where German troops are operating. Whether that's intentional or a massive coordination failure, I don't know. Frederick could see the wheels turning in Richter's mind. But I do know, Frederick continued, that in 12 minutes, everyone in this area is going to be dead unless we stop it. Richter looked at his convoy, his men, the coordinates on his map, and the radio equipment that could confirm or deny everything Frederick was telling him. Radio operator. He commanded. Contact Division Command. Request confirmation of chemical deployment coordinates and timeline. The radio crackled with static and urgent German voices. The response came back within 30 seconds. Sir. Division confirms chemical deployment zone Tango 77, timing 0530 hours, all personnel clear immediately. Richter went pale. Tango 77 includes our current position. And the research facility, Frederick added quietly. And your convoy route back to base. For a moment that lasted forever, Oberst Richter stared at Frederick Taylor, enemy agent who had just saved his life. What do you need? Richter asked finally. Transport to the research facility. Immediately. To do what? Frederick checked his watch one more time. 11 minutes until chemical deployment. To make sure this never happens again. And as the mixed convoy of German and British forces raced across the desert toward the chemical weapons depot, Frederick realized that his 72 hours behind enemy lines were about to culminate in the most important 11 minutes of the war. Hour 26, 11 minutes to hell. The chemical weapons research facility looked like a fortress carved into the desert floor. Concrete bunkers, observation towers, triple perimeter fence, Morrison noted as their convoy approached at maximum speed. This isn't a storage depot, it's a production facility. Frederick studied the installation through field glasses while Richter coordinated with his radio operator. Underground structures connected by covered walkways, ventilation systems that suggested sealed environments, and enough security to protect something far more dangerous than stored munitions. How many personnel? Richter asked his aide. Estimated 30 scientific staff, 50 security troops, minimal combat readiness. Frederick felt the pieces clicking into place. They're not expecting an attack because they think everyone in the area is dead or evacuated. Which gives us surprise advantage for exactly. Richter checked his watch. 8 minutes before chemical deployment begins. The convoy was slowing as they approached the facility's main gate. Frederick could see guards stepping out of their posts, routine security check, not combat alert. Klaus, Frederick said quietly, one last time, are you and your men with us on this? The German sergeant looked at the facility ahead, then at the British soldiers who had become unlikely allies, then at Frederick. Frederick, my grandfather died from gas attacks in the Great War. If stopping this prevents the same thing happening to anyone else. Klaus raised his rifle. We're with you. Sir. Richter's radio operator called out. Updated message from Division Command. Everyone froze as the crackling transmission came through the speaker. Chemical deployment postponed 15 minutes due to equipment malfunction. New timeline, 0545 hours. Frederick felt a surge of relief, then immediate suspicion. 15 minutes means we have time to secure the facility properly, Morrison said. Or it means we have 15 more minutes for something to go wrong, Frederick replied grimly. But as their convoy approached the gate, Frederick realized something was already wrong. The security guards weren't conducting a routine check. They were positioned for combat, weapons ready, with the alertness of troops expecting trouble. They know we're coming, he said quietly, Richter cursed in German. Impossible. We've maintained radio silence about our actual mission. Unless someone else has been listening to radio traffic. Frederick felt the familiar chill of a trap closing around him. Driver, stop the convoy 50 meters from the gate. The vehicles halted just as the first shot cracked across the desert air, a warning shot, fired high but unmistakable in its intent. A voice amplified by speakers echoed from the facility. Oberst Richter, you and your convoy will proceed no further. By order of SS Oberfuhrer Kellner. Frederick had never heard the name Kellner, but Richter's reaction told him everything he needed to know. The colonel went pale. Kellner is SS intelligence. If he's here. If he's here, what? If he's here, the chemical deployment isn't a tactical operation. It's something else entirely. Morrison leaned forward. What kind of something else? Richter's next words changed everything. Kellner specializes in eliminating witnesses to classified operations. The implication hit Frederick like a physical blow. The chemical deployment isn't targeting British positions. No. It's targeting anyone who knows about the chemical weapons program. Including us. The chemical weapons aren't just stored there. They're manufactured there. If we can capture the facility intact, we can reverse engineer German chemical weapons capabilities and develop countermeasures. And if we can't, then we destroy it and hope that sets their program back far enough to matter. Frederick looked around at the mixed group of soldiers following him through the desert, British troops who trusted their orders, German soldiers who trusted him personally, and officers from both sides who were gambling everything on a plan that had about a dozen ways to go catastrophically wrong. Morrison, there's something you should know. What? I've been improvising this entire mission for 25 hours straight. And? Frederick grinned. I'm getting pretty good at it. But even as they moved toward the chemical weapons depot, Frederick could hear the distant rumble of artillery positioning for the bombardment. In 18 minutes, chemical shells would begin falling on the position they'd just vacated. In 3 hours, if they failed, Those same weapons would be deployed against British positions throughout North Africa. And somewhere between now and then, Frederick Taylor would discover whether 25 hours behind enemy lines had prepared him for the most important mission of his life. Or the last. The sound of approaching vehicles made everyone freeze. "German patrol," Klaus whispered, raising his field glasses. "Full strength. Heading directly for us." Frederick checked his watch one more time. 17 minutes until chemical deployment. 3 miles to the depot. And now a German patrol that would either help them complete the mission or stop them permanently. The final phase of Frederick Taylor's 72 hours behind enemy lines was about to begin. And this time, there would be no improvisation, no deception, and no clever plans. Just a desperate race against time to prevent chemical weapons from changing the course of the war. Starting now. Hour 25, the final countdown. The approaching German vehicles weren't a patrol, they were a convoy. 6 trucks, 2 armored cars, and what looks like a mobile command unit, Klaus reported, his voice tight with recognition. "That's Oberst Richter's personal detachment." Frederick felt his stomach drop. The same Richter who authorized the chemical deployment. The same. Which meant the approaching convoy wasn't random, they were specifically hunting for the missing patrol that Klaus was supposed to be leading. "How long until they reach us?" Morrison asked. 3 minutes, maybe less. Frederick looked at the mixed group of soldiers around him, British troops who were technically his allies, German soldiers who had followed him into this mess, and officers from both sides who were depending on his judgment. 16 minutes until chemical deployment. 3 minutes until confrontation with German High Command. 2.5 miles to the chemical weapons depot. The mathematics of survival weren't adding up. "Klaus," Frederick said quietly, "what does Richter know about your patrol's mission?" "Standard reconnaissance. Check the eastern perimeter, investigate radio intercepts, report back by 0600. Does he know about me?" Klaus hesitated. "I don't think so. We never transmitted your identity." Frederick felt a plan crystallizing, dangerous, desperate, but possibly workable. "Everyone, listen carefully. When that convoy arrives, Klaus and his men are going to report successful completion of their mission. They found and eliminated the British reconnaissance threat. What about us?" Davies asked, gesturing to the British soldiers. "You're prisoners." Morrison stared at him. "Frederick, that's the only way this works." Klaus's patrol captured British agents attempting sabotage. They're transporting prisoners back to base for interrogation. And the chemical weapons depot. Frederick smiled grimly. Prisoners need to be processed at the nearest secure facility before transport to main headquarters. You're suggesting we get the Germans to escort us directly to the target? I'm suggesting we get them to escort us directly to the target, then help us capture it from the inside. The convoy was visible now, dust clouds rising in the pre-dawn light, vehicles moving fast across the desert floor. "Klaus, can you sell this?" The German sergeant looked at his men, then at the British soldiers who had been shooting at them 20 minutes earlier. "Klaus." Frederick pressed. "I can sell it." "But Frederick." "Yes. When this is over, if we survive, I'm going to have some very serious questions about everything that's happened tonight." Frederick met his eyes. "When this is over, Klaus, I'll answer every one of them." The lead vehicle in Richter's convoy was slowing down. "Positions, everyone," Frederick commanded. British soldiers, hands visible, weapons secured. Act defeated but not broken. Germans, maintain standard security formation around prisoners. "What about you?" Morrison asked. Frederick checked his German uniform, straightened his collar, and adopted the bearing of a Wehrmacht officer completing a successful mission. "I'm Klaus's superior, reporting mission success to Oberst Richter." The convoy stopped 50 meters away. Frederick could see figures dismounting from the vehicles, officers, enlisted men, and in the center, a tall man with the kind of rigid posture that suggested Prussian military academy training, Oberst Richter. Remember, Frederick whispered to Klaus, confident, professional, successful mission completion. Then they walked forward to meet the German commander who could either facilitate their mission or destroy it entirely. Oberst. Klaus called out, snapping to attention. Mission accomplished, sir. Richter approached with the measured stride of someone accustomed to absolute authority. His eyes swept the mixed group, German soldiers in proper formation, British prisoners under guard, and Frederick in the center wearing German officers' insignia. Report, Richter commanded. Sir. Frederick stepped forward. Hauptmann Weber, attached from 21st Panzer Reconnaissance. We successfully located and neutralized the British intelligence threat. 3 agents captured, radio equipment secured, immediate tactical intelligence obtained. Richter's eyes narrowed. Weber. I don't recall authorizing additional personnel for this operation. Frederick's pulse spiked, but his voice remained steady. Emergency attachment, sir. Division intelligence indicated sophisticated British infiltration requiring specialized counterintelligence expertise. And you just happened to be available. Sir, I was conducting parallel reconnaissance when we encountered Sergeant Klaus's patrol under fire from British positions. Tactical coordination seemed advisable. Richter studied Frederick with the intensity of a man trained to detect deception. Your identification papers. This was it. The moment where Frederick's entire deception either held together or collapsed catastrophically. Sir, papers were damaged during the firefight. However, I can provide tactical intelligence that confirms the success of our operation. Frederick gestured toward Morrison. This prisoner is Lieutenant Morrison, British Army. He was carrying detailed intelligence about German defensive positions, including advanced knowledge of this morning's chemical deployment. Richter went very still. What did you say about chemical deployment? Sir, the British have intercepted communications about Operation Giftgas. They know about the 0530 timing, the target coordinates, and the expanded deployment zone. It was a calculated risk, revealing just enough real intelligence to establish credibility while providing information that served Frederick's actual mission. Richter stepped closer to Morrison. Is this true? Morrison's eyes widened. You've been operating undercover for the past 6 hours. And they've been helping me complete my mission without knowing it. Jesus Christ, Frederick. That's brilliant. Insane. Treasonous. All 3. A German voice called out from Klaus's position. Sir. British forces are advancing. We need orders. Frederick looked at Morrison, then at the German position, then at the approaching British troops. James, I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to surrender. I need you to what? Surrender to Klaus's patrol. Let them take you prisoner. Morrison stared at him. Frederick, have you completely lost your mind? Trust me. It's the only way any of us survive the next 10 minutes. But before Morrison could respond, everything changed. A new voice crackled across the German radio frequency, a voice speaking perfect German with authority that made Klaus immediately respond. All units, this is Oberst Richter. Immediate withdrawal to Rally Point Alpha. Chemical deployment authorized for 0600 hours. All personnel clear target zone within 30 minutes. Frederick felt his blood turn to ice. Chemical deployment. Target zone. 30 minutes. The chemical weapons attack wasn't tomorrow morning. It was happening right now. And everyone on this battlefield, British, German, and Frederick Taylor, had exactly 30 minutes to live unless someone stopped it. James, Frederick said quietly, change of plans. What kind of change? Frederick looked across the battlefield at Klaus's position, then at the advancing British troops, then at the German armor approaching from the west. The kind where we save everybody. How? Frederick smiled grimly. By doing something so completely insane that it might actually work. Frederick, trust me, James. One more time. And then Frederick Taylor stood up in the middle of a firefight and did something that nobody, German, British, or otherwise, expected. He started walking toward both armies at the same time. With his hands raised. Shouting in 3 languages. And carrying information that would either save everyone on the battlefield, or get him shot by all of them. Hour 25, the final gambit. Frederick Taylor walked across a battlefield where 3 armies were trying to kill each other, and began shouting the only words that mattered: chemical attack. 30 minutes. Everyone dies. The first person to understand was a British lieutenant who lowered his rifle just long enough to process what he was hearing. The second was Klaus, who recognized Frederick's voice but couldn't understand why his German officer was shouting in English. The third was a German tank commander who had been listening to radio intercepts and knew exactly what chemical attack meant. Within 60 seconds, the entire battlefield had gone silent. You're all going to die. Frederick continued, now close enough that soldiers on both sides could see his face clearly. German High Command has authorized chemical deployment. Target zone includes this entire area. 30 minutes. Sir. Klaus called out, his voice confused and desperate. What are you doing? Frederick turned toward the German position, his heart breaking as he saw the trust and confusion in the sergeant's eyes. Klaus, I need you to listen very carefully. My name is not Weber. I am Corporal Frederick Taylor, British Army. For the past 6 hours, you have been helping me complete a reconnaissance mission behind German lines. The silence that followed was deafening. You're British. Klaus whispered. Yes. And right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is that in 28 minutes, German artillery is going to saturate this area with chemical weapons that will kill every man here, German, British, and anyone else stupid enough to still be breathing. Frederick could see the shock, betrayal, and dawning horror in Klaus's face. But he could also see something else, the intelligence of a professional soldier processing tactical realities. Sir, Klaus caught himself. Frederick. How do we know you're telling the truth? Because, Morrison called out, rising from his position with his hands visible, I can confirm it. Lieutenant James Morrison, British Army. We've been tracking German chemical weapons development for 3 weeks. The British lieutenant who had first lowered his rifle now stepped forward. And I can confirm both of their identities. Lieutenant Davies, 8th Army Reconnaissance. We've been looking for both of them for 12 hours. Frederick felt the weight of 3 armies' attention focused on him. Here's what's going to happen, he announced, his voice carrying with the authority of someone who had survived 25 hours behind enemy lines. Everyone, German, British, doesn't matter, move south to the rally point coordinates Klaus has. That puts us outside the chemical deployment zone. And then what? Davies asked. Then we complete the real mission. We destroy the chemical weapons depot before it can be used against anyone else. Klaus stepped forward, his rifle lowered but ready. Frederick, why should we trust you? The question hung in the air like smoke. Frederick looked at the young German sergeant, a man who had followed his orders, trusted his judgment, and helped him survive when he should have been a prisoner or a corpse. Because for the past 6 hours, Klaus, you've been helping me save British lives. And right now, I'm trying to save yours. But you lied to us. Yes. You used us. Yes. And now you want us to help you destroy German military assets. Frederick met Klaus's eyes steadily. No, Klaus. Now I want us to stop a chemical weapons attack that will kill thousands of innocent people. The German sergeant studied Frederick's face for a long moment. The chemical weapons, they're not just targeting military positions, are they? No. Morrison stepped closer, his voice heavy with knowledge that weighed on him. Intelligence suggests they're planning to deploy against civilian areas as well. Refugee camps. Field hospitals. Klaus went very still. Main got. So the question isn't whether you trust me, Frederick continued. The question is whether you can live with what happens if we do nothing. A new voice crackled across the German radio frequency. All units, update on chemical deployment. Target zone expanded. Deployment time moved up to 0530 hours. Clear all personnel immediately. Frederick checked his watch. 0510 hours. 20 minutes. Decision time, everyone, he announced. Davies raised his rifle. British forces will support the mission. Morrison nodded. Command authority confirmed. All eyes turned to Klaus. The German sergeant looked at his men, then at Frederick, then at the coordinates on his map. Sergeant. One of his soldiers asked quietly. Klaus was quiet for a long moment. Then, pack your gear. We're moving south. Sergeant. You heard me. And anyone who has a problem following orders can explain it to Oberst Richter when we get back. But as the combined force began moving south, Frederick realized they had solved only the first part of an impossible equation. Getting clear of the chemical attack zone was one thing, stopping the chemical weapons deployment was another. Morrison, he said quietly as they moved, where exactly is this depot? 15 miles south, just like I said. And how exactly are we supposed to destroy it with no explosives, minimal ammunition, and a mixed force of British and German soldiers who were shooting at each other 10 minutes ago? Morrison smiled grimly. That's where your infiltration skills come in handy. How? Because you're not just destroying the depot, Frederick. You're capturing it. Frederick stopped walking. Capturing it. Frederick stared at the facility ahead, fortress walls designed not just to keep enemies out, but to keep secrets in. The expanded deployment zone that would kill German troops. The accelerated timeline. The convenient equipment malfunction providing just enough delay for Kellner to position his forces. Everything had been planned from the beginning. They never intended for any of us to survive this, Frederick said quietly. Sir. The radio operator called out. Another transmission coming in. The voice that crackled through the speaker was cold, precise, and absolutely authoritative. This is SS Oberfuhrer Kellner. Oberst Richter, you have exceeded your operational parameters. Stand down immediately and surrender all personnel for security processing. Richter looked at Frederick, then at the mixed group of British and German soldiers in the convoy. Security processing. Execution, Frederick translated. He's going to kill everyone who knows about this facility. The speaker crackled again. You have 2 minutes to comply. Failure to surrender will result in immediate activation of perimeter defense systems. Frederick could see movement along the facility's walls, automated weapons systems training on their convoy, soldiers taking position with the methodical precision of troops following well-rehearsed plans. 13 minutes until chemical deployment, Morrison noted grimly. 2 minutes until they start shooting at us. And about 30 seconds until I do something incredibly stupid, Frederick added. He stood up in the back of the lead truck. Kellner. Frederick shouted, his voice carrying across the desert. This is Corporal Frederick Taylor, British Army. Silence from the facility. I've been behind German lines for 26 hours. I know about your chemical weapons program. I know about the targeting coordinates. And I know about the real purpose of this facility. The response came immediately. British agent, you will surrender yourself for interrogation or all personnel in your convoy will be eliminated. Negative. Frederick shouted back. Here's my counteroffer. He pulled out a British radio, the one piece of equipment he'd kept hidden throughout his entire infiltration. This is Corporal Taylor calling British Artillery Command. Fire mission authorization Baker 77. Target coordinates. Frederick began reading off the exact coordinates of the chemical weapons facility, his voice carrying clearly across the desert. Kellner's response was immediate and desperate. "Cease fire. All units engage the convoy." The facility erupted in gunfire, machine guns, rifles, and automated defense systems all opening up simultaneously on Frederick's position, but Frederick was still shouting coordinates into his radio, still calling for British artillery support that might or might not exist. Impact in 4 minutes. All friendly forces clear the target area. It was complete bluff. Frederick had no artillery support, no fire mission authorization, and no way to actually destroy the facility from a distance, but Kellner didn't know that. "Sir!" One of Richter's men shouted over the gunfire. "The facility is beginning emergency evacuation procedures." Frederick could see it now, personnel streaming out of underground bunkers, vehicles starting up, the panicked movement of people trying to escape an incoming artillery barrage. "Move the convoy forward," Frederick commanded. "Now, while they're evacuating." "Sir, that's suicidal." "No," Frederick replied, checking his watch. "That's our only chance. We've got 11 minutes to get inside and stop the chemical deployment manually." As their convoy raced toward the facility gates under heavy fire, Frederick realized that his 72 hours behind enemy lines were about to culminate in the most desperate 11 minutes of his life. Inside that facility was the master control system for the chemical weapons deployment. Inside that facility were the weapons that could change the course of the war. And inside that facility, SS-Oberfuhrer Kellner was making final preparations to ensure that everyone who knew about the chemical weapons program, including Frederick Taylor, died in the next few minutes. The gates of the facility loomed ahead. Machine gun fire tore through their convoy. Emergency klaxons wailed from inside the bunkers. And Frederick Taylor, who had started this mission as a simple reconnaissance scout, was about to infiltrate the most heavily defended chemical weapons facility in North Africa. With 10 minutes to save thousands of lives, including his own. Hour 26, breaching the gates, the first vehicle exploded 30 meters from the facility entrance. Frederick rolled clear as shrapnel tore through the truck's canvas cover, Klaus diving in the opposite direction while machine gun fire chewed up the desert sand between them. "Morrison!" Frederick shouted over the noise. "Where's that artillery support?" "What artillery support?" "You made it up." "I know that. But they don't." Another truck erupted in flames. Richter's convoy was being systematically destroyed by overlapping fields of fire from the facility's defensive positions. Professional, methodical, and absolutely lethal, but Frederick had noticed something during the gunfire. The automated defense systems were firing in predetermined patterns. Which meant they were programmed, not manually controlled, which meant they could be tricked. "Klaus, take your men left along the perimeter fence. Create noise and movement but stay in cover." "What about you?" "I'm going through the front door." It was insane. It was suicidal. It was also the only plan that might work. While Klaus's German soldiers and Morrison's British troops created diversions on the flanks, Frederick sprinted directly at the main gate in a zigzag pattern designed to confuse the automated targeting systems. Machine gun fire tracked behind him, always one step too slow to catch his irregular movement. 20 meters to the gate. 15. 10. A guard appeared in the gatehouse, rifle raised. Frederick dove left, rolled, and came up with his sidearm already firing. The guard spun backward into the concrete structure. Frederick reached the gate control mechanism. The system was German engineering, precise, logical, and completely unfamiliar. Red lights, green switches, control panels labeled in technical terminology that Frederick couldn't begin to understand. "Come on," he muttered, trying switches at random. The wrong switch triggered an alarm that made the previous klaxons sound like whispers. The right switch opened the main gate with a grinding mechanical roar. "Gates open." Frederick shouted back toward the convoy survivors. "Move. Move. Move." But as the mixed force of Allied and German soldiers poured through the entrance, Frederick realized they had bigger problems. The facility's main courtyard was a killing ground, open space surrounded by elevated firing positions, with no cover except a few concrete barriers and the burning wreckage of evacuated vehicles, and there, standing on the central bunker's observation platform, was a figure in SS uniform who could only be Oberfuhrer Kellner. Corporal Taylor. Kellner's voice boomed across the courtyard through loudspeakers. Your artillery support appears to be delayed. Frederick felt his stomach drop. Kellner had called his bluff. Perhaps you would like to negotiate the terms of your surrender. Frederick looked around the courtyard. 18 survivors from the convoy, British and German soldiers who had followed him into this death trap. Klaus, wounded but still mobile. Morrison, bleeding from shrapnel cuts but still carrying his rifle. Richter, coordinating defensive positions with the calm professionalism of a career officer, all of them depending on Frederick to get them out alive. Kellner. Frederick shouted back. I've got a counterproposal. I'm listening. Release all scientific personnel, deactivate the chemical deployment sequence, and surrender the facility. Kellner's laughter echoed across the courtyard. In exchange for what, Corporal? In exchange for not destroying your entire operation. With what weapons? Your non-existent artillery. Your mixed group of wounded soldiers. Frederick felt the weight of 19 pairs of eyes watching him, waiting for the brilliant plan that would save them all. The problem was, he didn't have a brilliant plan. What he had was 9 minutes until chemical deployment, no heavy weapons, and the growing certainty that they were all about to die. Unless, Frederick looked at the facility's ventilation systems, the emergency evacuation procedures still in progress, and the chemical storage bunkers marked with hazard symbols. A terrible, desperate, completely insane idea began forming in his mind. Morrison, he said quietly, how much do you know about chemical weapons storage protocols? Enough to know they're designed to prevent exactly what I think you're considering. And if someone ignored the safety protocols? Catastrophic failure. The entire facility would be contaminated. Frederick smiled grimly. Including the deployment systems. Frederick, if you're thinking about deliberately triggering a chemical accident, I'm thinking about making sure these weapons never get used against anyone. Klaus crawled over to their position, his face pale from blood loss but his eyes alert. What kind of accident? The kind where we turn the facility's own chemical weapons against itself. Richter overheard and immediately understood the implications. Main got. You want to breach containment deliberately. I want to make sure Kellner's chemical deployment kills the right targets. That's insane. Suicidal. Tactically brilliant. Richter considered for a moment. All three. What do you need? Frederick studied the facility layout, the ventilation systems, and the bunker entrances marked with chemical hazard warnings. I need someone who knows German chemical storage procedures. Someone who can identify the most dangerous materials. And someone crazy enough to help me break into a chemical weapons storage area. Klaus raised his hand. I volunteer. Klaus, you're wounded. I'm also the one who knows where the storage bunkers are. I helped design security protocols for facilities like this. Frederick stared at the German sergeant. You what? Before the war, I was a chemical engineer. Industrial safety protocols. Everything clicked into place. Klaus, can you trigger a containment breach that would neutralize the deployment systems without killing everyone in the facility? Possibly. But we'd have maybe 3 minutes to evacuate the contamination zone before it becomes lethal. And Kellner's people? If they're still in the underground bunkers when containment fails. Klaus shrugged grimly. Frederick looked around at the mixed group of soldiers who had followed him this far. British troops who trusted their orders. German soldiers who trusted him personally. Officers who were betting everything on a plan that had never been attempted before. Anyone who wants to leave, leave now, Frederick announced. What we're about to do is going to be remembered as either the most brilliant sabotage operation of the war, or the most catastrophic friendly fire incident in military history. Nobody moved. "Sir," Morrison said quietly, "what are your orders?" Frederick checked his watch one more time. 7 minutes until chemical deployment. 3 minutes to breach containment. 2 minutes to evacuate the contamination zone. And somewhere in those calculations, hopefully enough time to save thousands of lives and get his people out alive. "Klaus, lead the way to the chemical storage bunkers. Morrison, coordinate rear guard. Richter, when I give the signal, get everyone clear of the facility." As they began moving toward the underground bunkers, Kellner's voice boomed across the courtyard one more time. "Corporal Taylor. You have 2 minutes to surrender before I activate manual deployment override." Frederick looked back at the SS officer on his observation platform, then at the chemical storage bunkers ahead. "Klaus," he said quietly, "change of plans." "What kind of change?" "The kind where we make sure Oberfuhrer Kellner gets a first-hand demonstration of his own chemical weapons." And as they descended into the underground storage facility, Frederick Taylor realized that his 72 hours behind enemy lines were about to culminate in 6 minutes that would determine the fate of everyone, friend and enemy, in North Africa. The chemical weapons that were designed to kill thousands were about to become the key to stopping the war's most dangerous escalation. If Frederick and Klaus could survive long enough to make it work. Hour 26, into the chemical heart, the underground storage facility smelled like death waiting to happen. "Hydrogen cyanide, chlorine gas, and something I don't recognize," Klaus whispered as they descended concrete steps into artificially lit corridors. "The unidentified compound is what we need to worry about." Frederick could see storage tanks lining the walls, massive steel containers marked with skull and crossbones symbols and German technical specifications. Each tank was connected to an elaborate distribution system of pipes, valves, and monitoring equipment. "How do we trigger containment breach without killing ourselves in the process?" Morrison asked. "Carefully," Klaus replied, studying the tank configurations. "These systems are designed with multiple safety redundancies. But every safety system has vulnerabilities if you know where to look." Above them, Kellner's voice echoed through the facility's speaker system. 1 minute 30 seconds until manual deployment, Corporal Taylor." Frederick felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool underground temperature. "Klaus, whatever you're going to do, there." Klaus pointed to a central control panel covered with gauges, switches, and warning lights. "Master pressure regulation system. If I can create an overpressure condition in the primary storage tanks while simultaneously opening the ventilation intake valves." English, Klaus. "I turn the facility's own air circulation system into a delivery method for its stored chemical weapons." Frederick felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. "Everyone in the facility dies. Everyone in the underground sections dies quickly. Everyone in the above-ground sections has maybe 5 minutes to evacuate before the contamination becomes lethal. Including us." Klaus looked at him grimly. "We're in the underground sections." The implications hit Frederick like a physical blow. "You're telling me this is a suicide mission?" "I'm telling you we have about 90 seconds to trigger the breach, reach surface level, and get clear of the contamination zone." Morrison stepped forward. "Frederick, there has to be another way." "Sir." Richter's voice crackled through Frederick's German radio. "Kellner has activated some kind of security lockdown. The exits are sealing." Frederick felt the walls of the underground facility suddenly seem much smaller. "Klaus, how long does it take to trigger the breach?" 30 seconds if everything goes perfectly. And if it doesn't? Then we become the first casualties of our own sabotage operation." Above them, mechanical sounds echoed through the facility, heavy doors slamming shut, ventilation systems changing their rhythm, the systematic lockdown of a fortress designed to contain its own deadliest secrets. "Frederick," Morrison said quietly, "Kellner's not just trying to stop us. He's making sure we're trapped down here when the deployment happens. Frederick realized with growing horror that they'd walked directly into Kellner's trap. The SS officer hadn't been trying to stop their infiltration. He'd been herding them into the facility's most vulnerable location, where they could be eliminated along with any evidence of what they'd discovered. 1 minute to manual deployment. Kellner's voice boomed through the speakers, and Frederick could hear satisfaction in the tone. Klaus, start the breach sequence. Frederick, that's an order. Klaus moved to the control panel, his hands flying over switches and valves with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood exactly what he was doing. Pressure building in tanks 7 through 12, he reported. Ventilation system responding. Emergency protocols are trying to compensate, but red warning lights began flashing throughout the storage facility. Warning, pressure anomaly detected. Initiating emergency containment procedures. The automated voice was calm, professional, and completely terrifying in its implications. How long until breach? Frederick asked. 20 seconds. How long until we're dead if we stay here? 15 seconds after breach. Frederick looked around the underground storage facility, concrete walls, steel doors, and only one way out. The way that was now sealed by Kellner's security lockdown. Morrison, try the emergency exit protocols on that panel. Morrison rushed to a wall-mounted control system, frantically working switches. It's not responding. Everything's locked down from the master control system. 10 seconds to breach, Klaus announced. I can't stop it now even if I wanted to. Frederick felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down in crisis situations. In 10 seconds, chemical weapons would begin flooding the underground facility. In 20 seconds, everyone in the storage areas would be dead. In 60 seconds, the contamination would reach surface levels. And somewhere in that timeline, Frederick Taylor had to find a way to save his people and complete his mission. Klaus, where are the emergency containment protocols stored? What kind of containment protocols? The ones designed to seal this facility if there's ever a catastrophic breach. Klaus's eyes widened with understanding. The master isolation system. If we can trigger facility-wide containment, it seals all underground sections but provides emergency evacuation routes to the surface. Where? Central Command Bunker, 1 level up. The sound of hissing gas began echoing through the storage facility. Breach initiated. Klaus shouted. Chemical contamination in 60 seconds. Frederick grabbed his rifle and headed for the stairs leading to the upper level. Everyone moves. Now. Sir. Morrison called after him. The exits are sealed. Then we make new exits. As they raced up concrete steps toward the Central Command bunker, Frederick could hear the systematic failure of safety systems behind them, alarms, automated warnings, and the deadly hiss of chemical weapons being released into the facility's air circulation system. Kellner's voice crackled through speakers with growing urgency. All surface personnel evacuate immediately. Chemical contamination detected in lower levels. 45 seconds until contamination reaches our position. Klaus shouted. Frederick reached the command bunker level and immediately saw the problem. The central command center was protected by reinforced steel doors designed to withstand direct artillery hits, and those doors were sealed tight. Klaus, can you override the security lockdown? Not from out here. Then we go through the door. Morrison stared at the massive steel barrier. Frederick, that's 3 inches of hardened steel. I know. Frederick pulled out the explosive charges he'd been carrying since the beginning of his infiltration mission. Originally intended for destroying German radio equipment. Now repurposed for the most important demolition of his military career. Everyone take cover. This is going to be loud. He placed the charges against the door's locking mechanism, activated the timer, and dove behind a concrete barrier. 30 seconds until chemical contamination. Klaus shouted over the growing sound of alarms. 20 seconds until demolition. Frederick counted down the seconds, watching his timeline collapse into a window of opportunity measured in heartbeats. Explosive breach of the command center in 15 seconds. Chemical contamination reaching their level in 25 seconds. Emergency evacuation protocols needed to be activated in the 10-second gap between those two events. Or everyone dies. The charges detonated with a concussion that shattered concrete and twisted steel. Through the smoke and debris, Frederick could see into the command center, banks of monitoring equipment, communication systems, and there, in the center, the master control panel for the entire facility. But standing next to that control panel, with a pistol aimed directly at Frederick's position, was SS-Oberfuhrer Kellner. "Corporal Taylor," Kellner said calmly, "you're too late." Frederick faces Kellner in the command center with chemical contamination rising in seconds until lethal exposure. The ultimate showdown between the infiltrator and the SS commander begins now.